The drive to the studio did wonders for my mood. The sun was shining, I had a fresh breakfast burrito in my hand, and I'd stumbled across a good jam on the radio. I was blasting it as loud as I could and singing along, drowning out my earlier argument with V. I checked my holo when I arrived at the studio, a part of me hoping to see a missed call or message from V, but there was nothing, though I couldn't blame her. She was fully within her rights to be waiting for an apology from me, and I didn't want this to be something that festered. V had a problem, and the more time we spent arguing, the less we would have to deal with things. When I climbed out of my van, I typed a short message to V. It wasn't the long-winded apology she was owed, since that was a cowardly way out of things. Just something brief to let her know I'd screwed up. If something happened to her, I'd never forgive myself. I didn't notice how quiet it was as I stepped inside of the studio and closed the door behind me. My attention was focused on my holo when something gripped my scalp, causing me to yelp in pain. I dropped my holo to the floor. Fuck, it felt like my hair was about to be ripped from their roots. A sudden jerk backwards made me stumble onto my knees. It was only when I reached up to figure out what I'd gotten caught on that I saw the large figure who'd grabbed me. "Get the fuck off of me!" But he only twisted tighter, forcing a cry from my lips. I tried to beat him away from me, but to no avail. "You'd better calm down, Alvarez," a deep voice called out. "Otherwise, it won't end well for you here." My eyes shot open. Not too far away from me was a group of men dressed in various styles of business attire. They would have appeared to be nothing more than a bunch of corpos if not for the guns in their hands. They were all nondescript, and the only thing that set them apart were the various styles of cyberware they sported. Some had implants on their faces, others looked to have had their limbs swapped out. But the heavy-set man standing in the center of the studio was quite distinguishable. Well, heavy-set was an understatement. He was outright bloated, though the suit he wore was more than generous enough to accommodate him. He wore a pair of aviators, though I could still make out his optics behind their clear lenses. I didn't recognize any of them, but the figures kneeling on the floor were all familiar to me. Roxanne and Katie's faces were twisted in terror as they held their hands behind their heads. A thin trail of blood ran down Roxanne's chin from a cut on her lip. Katie was quivering and my stomach rolled when I noticed the dark stain on her pants and the yellow puddle underneath her. There was no time to slow things down. I could feel every hair being plucked from my scalp, and it was agony. "What do you want?" I sputtered. The bloated man stepped forward so he stood between Roxanne and Katie, their faces uncomfortably close to his crotch. "Do you know who we are?" Despite the pain it caused, I managed a brief shake of my head. He smiled and sauntered closer until he was just a few feet away from me. The heavy scent of cheap cologne flooded my nostrils. He knelt down, his knees somehow supporting his enormous weight, and pulled back the sleeve on his arm to reveal a large tattoo of a tiger on his forearm. It was one I'd seen many times before. Too many times. Fuck. His smile grew, and I realized I'd spoken out loud. "That's right. We, of course, know who you are, Judy. We never forget a face, especially one belonging to a former employee of ours." "I left years ago. The claws ain't out. You got no business here." "Oh, but we do." My stomach sank as the gravity of the situation suddenly weighed on me. The man rose back to his feet and looked down at me. A chill ran down my spine at the obvious power dynamic. "You see, this seems to be the only place I do have any business left, seeing as how you clapped nearly all of our dolls. I suppose you heard we had to close the doors at Clouds." "I didn't clap nothing. They're just employees. They're not your fucking slaves. What I'm doing is out. Mierda. It's no different from what anyone else in this fucking city does."
"And that's where you're wrong."
The bloated man made his way back towards Roxanne and Katie and stopped in front of them. His eyes darted between them before settling on Katie.
"What's your name?"
Katie's eyes widened and she drew a shaky breath. I'm Katie."
"Katie, huh? And you're 18?
"Yeah."
"Good."
He turned toward the other woman.
"Roxanne, gotta say, I'm very disappointed in you. Although, I guess it's a good thing you kept in touch with the last few dolls who stayed behind. It's made it a whole lot easier for us to find this place."
"I just went to work someplace else, that's all," Roxanne pleaded. The crack of his palm across her cheek echoed off the walls. Katie screamed and cowered as I craned my neck, trying to get back on my feet, but the man who was holding me yanked me back. He pressed his foot down on the back of my calf, not so hard as to cause me pain, but enough to send the message he easily could if he wanted to. I watched helplessly as Roxanne rubbed at the fresh handprint rising to the surface of her cheek. No, you didn't just go to work someplace else. You plotted against us again. He turned back to me, his face full of malice. And you just couldn't leave things at Clouds well enough alone, could you? What do you want? I screamed. For this shit to be brought to an end. For good. Today. A cold sweat broke out across my body as I searched for anything that could help. My hollow? It had slid across the floor when I dropped it and was at the feet of one of the claws, excruciatingly out of reach. Scream? The neighborhood was deserted and no one would hear. Security? Fuck. Why hadn't I just listened to V and called River?
Haruto.
Yeah, boss? The man behind me replied. Let me see that giant fucking sword of yours. The sound of scraping metal made the hair on the back of my neck stand. The boss, whoever he was, approached and took the sword being handed to him. My eyes were fixed on the sharp blade as it glinted in the harsh lighting above my head. This was happening too fast. The boss examined it, feeling its weight in his hand before turning back to Roxanne and Katie. Look at me, Roxanne. Roxanne did as she was told. She was shaking with fear as he rested the blade on top of her head. What were your last monthly numbers? What? He struck her again, this time with the back of his hand. It would leave an enormous bruise on the side of her face if she got out of this alive. I don't remember. The boss laughed, a bellicose sound that made his belly jiggle. It's not even been a month since you left and you can't remember. Well, shit. Let me remind you. Does 22 sound familiar? I guess? You guess? Well, I don't guess. Our business runs on numbers, and you only drew in 22 clients for the entire month. A fresh piece of ass like this, he pointed the tip of the sword towards Katie, can pull down that many in just a few days. I'm sorry to say this, Roxanne, but I don't see a future for you at Clouds. His arm moved faster than I could see. By the time I let out my scream, Roxanne's body had collapsed to the ground with a sickening thud. Her severed head rolled across the floor before a boot came to rest on top of it, bringing it to a stop. The freckles dotting her skin were plainly visible, despite the horrified expression etched upon her lifeless face. I struggled as violently as I could, while Katie doubled over and retched onto the floor. You fucking bastard! He turned to face me, the sword dangling lazily in his hand. Fresh rivulets of blood streamed down its metal surface and pattered against the floor. I want you to remember this moment every day for the rest of your fucking life. You're lucky to be worth more alive than dead, or you'd be joining your tomb here. If you ever stick your head in Cloud's business again, we're gonna keep it and toss the rest of you out with the trash, just like poor Roxanne here. I tried to say something, but all I could focus on was Roxanne's freckles. She'd never gotten her real skin job. And it was all my fault. Tears of despair pricked at my eyes. Pick that up, he ordered, pointing to Roxanne's head. We'll take it with us, and keep it around for a while, just so the other dolls remember what's in store for them if they don't punch in like they're supposed to. While one of his goons lifted Roxanne's head off the floor, he turned his attention toward Katie, who was now hyperventilating. He knelt next to her and rested the tip of the blade under her jaw, forcing her to meet his gaze. How would you like to come work at Clouds? He asked in a friendly voice. Good wages and much better conditions than this place. He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he rested a heavy hand on top of her head and bobbed it up and down for her. Good. Of course, you'll need to fill out an application, so we'll have all your deets on file. The process usually takes a couple of weeks, and then I still need to perform my own personal evaluation to make sure you're the right caliber of talent for Clouds. But I'm pretty sure we can get that part worked out on the drive over there. You'll have 15 minutes to get me off. But with lips like those, you won't need more than 5, will you? Stars swam at the edges of my vision. This had to be a horrific nightmare, one which I couldn't wake from. I was lying in bed, screaming my head off, and V would shake me awake at any second.
Put her in the back of my car and drag this one outside, he said, pointing at me.
The pressure of my scalp reached the breaking point as I was dragged towards the door by my hair. I grabbed onto his arm, desperate to relieve the pain as I caked and screamed. The door opened and I felt a brief moment of relief when the man who'd been holding me released his grip, but it was short-lived, as a swift kick to my rear caused me to spill onto the pavement. The skin of my palms was torn away as they scraped against the rough sidewalk. I heard footsteps and car doors opening as a frenzy of activity broke out around me. Looking up, I saw several cars and a limousine parked along the street. How had I not noticed those before? By the time I'd climbed back to my hands and knees, Katie was being led into the back of a limo, followed closely by the boss.
Torch it,
he said as he climbed inside. I started to my feet, but froze, finding myself face to face with the barrel of a gun.
Stay there, bitch.
I was powerless to do anything but watch as they opened the trunk of one of the cars and pulled out a pair of gas cans. The tears that had been welling in my eyes finally spilled down my cheeks as they went back inside. Even over their laughter, I could still hear liquid splashing against the floor as they doused the studio. The odor of fuel quickly reached my nostrils. They tossed the canisters inside when they were done and bounded towards their cars. The man pointing the gun at me turned away and jogged after them. One of the limo's windows slid down and the boss's head emerged.
Alvarez, thank you for closing your doors and referring.
Oh, fuck. That's good. Keep doing that.
Referring all the dolls back to Clouds.
And look at it this way. He lit a cigarette and took a drag.
I'll always keep a booth open for you at Clouds.
He flicked the cigarette toward the entrance. It landed in the fresh pool of gas and quickly ignited, sending a wave of blue flame racing inside the studio.
Let's go.
I finally rose to my feet as they sped off down the street. Heavy white smoke was already billowing through the door. All the rags, bedding, and towels had made for excellent kindling. I gagged, suddenly remembering Roxanne's body was still inside. Was I breathing her burning body in? I cried and watched as everything, all my hopes and dreams, went up in smoke. And despite everything I'd lost, all I could see every time I closed my eyes was Roxanne's freckles. No one bothered to show up as the building was reduced to a smoldering pile of brick and rubble. I didn't even have a way to call for help since my hollow was buried somewhere under it all. When it had grown quiet, and with nothing more I could do, I got back in my van and started for home. But I hadn't even made it a few blocks before a sob escaped my lips and I had to pull over and cry again. Alvarez Studios was gone. Susie would be livid, and we were close to broke. The claws had exacted their revenge, and I had made things even worse for the dolls. I'd dragged Katie into this whole sorry mess, and I couldn't imagine what fate awaited her. If she managed to survive, she would certainly blame me for everything. And Roxanne... I glanced up at the skyline. How could something so beautiful be so rotten to the core? But I knew it wasn't the city that was rotten. It was just a mess of concrete and steel. It was me. For a long time, I wept before finally pulling myself together and speeding off for home. I had to talk to V. She was all I had left, and I'd treated her like shit. I remember she'd left before me and probably wouldn't be home anyway. Was there anything I couldn't screw up? Our apartment, which had disgusted me for years, was suddenly my refuge as I pulled in and parked. And thank fuck, V's motorcycle was parked outside. She'd come back home. I staggered up the stairs, holding onto the rail as I went. As soon as the door opened, I stumbled inside and tried to call out to her, my voice catching around the lump in my throat. I cleared it away and tried again. V? She was passed out on the couch, the capsule of beauties resting on the table next to her, practically flaunting it. But I didn't give a shit. I needed to tell her everything that had happened, and I needed to hear that I wasn't a complete fuck-up who had ruined everything. V? I raised my voice, nudging her. V startled awake, her eyes flickering about before finding my own. The light behind them quickly dimmed as she frowned. What do you want? It all fell apart. I blurted out as more tears spilled from my eyes. The claws showed up and torched the whole fucking studio. They grabbed Katie and Roxanne's... I was such a coward. Roxanne was dead because of me, and I didn't even have the balls to say it out loud. All I could do was cry like a blubbering gonk. V bolted upright. What do you mean they torched the place? It's all gone. They killed Roxanne. There. I'd said it. I must have been an exceptionally twisted person to have felt a flash of pride at finally spitting the words out. Oh, fuck. V lowered her face into her hands. I tried to stop them, I pleaded, realizing I was trying to convince myself. There were just too many of them, and they got the drop on me. They all had guns, and... Well, you probably could have done a lot more if you'd gotten a security system installed like I told you to. Did you ever even buy a fucking lock? What? Of course you didn't. V threw her hands in the air and stood, brushing past me. Did you really think the claws weren't gonna come after you? No, I didn't. V, all I did was open a business, and they're fucking scumbags who don't give a shit what set of rules you're playing by. Don't yell at me, I screamed. Don't you even give a shit that I was almost killed? This was all going wrong. I knew V was still pissed off about what had happened earlier, but this kind of reaction, I didn't deserve this. Did I? V tightened her jaw. Of course I give a shit. It's not like I'm some kind of broken, drugged-out bitch weighing down her output like an anchor for years. Or maybe I am. My jaw dropped. Hearing it repeated back to me made it clear just how vicious I'd been toward her. V seemed to notice the tangled mess in my hair, and her expression softened. Lay down and get some rest. I'm gonna head over there and see if there's anything we could scrounge up. There isn't, V. It's all burnt up. Well, then we're pretty fucked, aren't we? V shook her head and grabbed her jacket off the counter, muttering under her breath, but still loud enough for me to overhear it. Burned away all our fucking eddies. There it was. Her opportunity to sink a knife of her own in. V didn't see herself as the anchor weighing us down. Instead, I was the fucking failure and the cause of all our troubles. The fire, Roxanne, Katie, all the lost equipment. It had all stemmed from my idea. And she'd only resorted to beauties because I'd ridden her ass for months over the need to do something about them. Everything was my fault, and she was right. V grabbed a pistol from the spare room, checked the safety, then slid it into her holster and turned toward me. I'll message you when I get there. My hollow's gone. Burned up with everything else. Oh, great. V rolled her eyes. I'm gonna go over there and see what's what. If I can't grab anything, then I'm gonna swing by Dino's place to see if he's got any quick gigs I can pick up. If he can throw some quick work my way, I'll try to buy you a new one. Even an anchor served a purpose. I felt entirely useless. I didn't have the energy to fight, to help, to do anything. I was broke and had lost everything except V, who probably couldn't stand the sight of me. How had this happened? V, I'm sorry. Something flashed behind V's eyes. She started towards me but froze. I know you are. Just stay home. Can you call in tonight? I don't want you on the roads without a hollow... Fuck. You can't call in, can you? Alright, I'll call Lizzie's for you while I'm on the road. Anything I need to tell him? Just tell him I'm sick, I mumbled, plopping down on the couch. I gotta think about how I'm gonna deal with Susie. She'll be pissed, and the last thing I want is for the Mox to end up in a shooting war with the Claws. Don't want any more blood spilled because of me. I'd thrown my head in my hands and had only heard V's footsteps approaching. She rested a hand on my shoulder and planted a long kiss on my head, forcing another sob out of me. I'm sorry I snapped at you. Are you sure you're okay? You're not hurt? Yeah, I'm sure. Are you okay staying here by yourself? I sniffled and nodded. Sitting on my ass so I didn't get in her way seemed to be the only thing I was good for. At least I could do that much without screwing things up. V rubbed my shoulder and wiped a tear away from my cheek. Okay. Try to get some rest. I'll be back as soon as I can. With a final rub of my shoulder, V turned and walked out the door. Once again, I was surrounded by silence. Get some rest. How was I supposed to do that? But I tried. I laid down on the couch and closed my eyes, hoping the onslaught of stress I'd been under would force my brain to shut down. But all I could see were Roxanne's freckles. When I opened my eyes to escape them, Katie's terrified sobs rang in my ears, and the smell of urine and burning flesh wouldn't leave my nostrils. The smell of crushing failure. When I couldn't stand it any longer, I gave up and made my way toward the kitchen. I knew it was a mistake to start drinking so early and to get thoroughly shit-faced as I intended to, but I needed to escape, or I would go crazy. I grabbed the bottle of vodka and an empty glass out of the cupboard. Once I filled it to the brim, I took the bottle back with me to the couch so I wouldn't have to get up later. I had raised the glass to my lips, already feeling my sinuses starting to open when I froze. Go for it. Think I'm gonna go with a Rebel Mojito. I love anything with lime. Real lime, I mean. Not that synthetic crap. I threw my head back and gulped down as much as I could. A violent cough erupted from my throat when some of the vodka slid down the wrong pipe and spilled into my lungs. But I didn't stop. As soon as I'd caught my breath, I swallowed another mouthful, followed by another. My nerves quickly cooled off as I stared at the empty glass, already knowing what I would do next. When my eyes snapped open, I was greeted by a dry mouth and a dull aching in my skull. I groaned and smacked my lips in an attempt to dispel the bitter taste in my mouth. After blinking away the fogginess, I realized V was kneeling next to me, though it was so dark it was hard to make out her features. Wait, had the sun already set? I couldn't have been out that long. Judy? Yeah. Decided to hit the bottle, huh? Don't start on me, V, please. It's not every day you see a chum of yours get their head cut off. I sat up and immediately wished I hadn't as my stomach rolled and the pounding in my head threatened to split my skull open. I should have remembered to grab a couple hangaways before doing that to myself. Fair enough. Here. V handed me a scuffed up hollow, one which clearly wasn't off the shelf. I swiped a finger across the screen and was greeted with the customary welcome screen and request for my biosig. Where'd this come from? Dino's got a bunch of them laying around for gigs where a clean line is needed. Dare I ask what you did to get this? No, V said plainly. You don't dare. Fair enough. V didn't deserve any judgment after how badly I'd fucked up. I need water. All right, V nodded. And then you're gonna lay down in bed and sleep for real. I'll stay out here on the couch tonight. You don't want to sleep next to me? Of course she doesn't. Why the fuck would she want to sleep next to you? You stayed home to get hammered, and what did V get for her troubles? Nothing but problems that you created. I think it's best if you lay down and get your head on right. You're probably in for a long night, and I can't get any rest if you're tossing and turning. And don't even think of starting with me on the beauties again. After the day I've had, I'm owed a decent night's sleep. It felt wrong to nod in agreement, but I did it anyway. V, are you angry at me? I thought I knew the answer to that already, but for some reason, I needed to hear the words and to clear the air between us. Needed. That word had popped up in my thoughts more often as of late. Why? What did I need? Why did I keep sticking my nose where it didn't belong? Why had I emptied the bottle earlier? Why did I need V to say she was angry at me? Yeah, I'm pretty pissed. I'm really sorry all this happened, and I'm glad you're okay, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't excuse what you did to me earlier. I know. No, you don't. You think I don't know how badly I fucked up? Of course I do, but I really didn't need you rubbing my face in it. And considering we're almost bled dry and got nothing to show for it now, it's really fucking hard for me not to say I told you so. It stung to hear her say it out loud, as I knew it would, but I suppose I'd earned it. I laid back on the couch and closed my eyes. V sighed and rose to her feet. Judy, what? There was a long pause. That fucking place was scorched to shit. How did you manage to walk out of there without a scratch on you? I opened my eyes.
You're lucky to be worth more alive than dead, or you'd be joining your chum here.
I was so traumatized by everything that had happened that I hadn't considered why they spared me. Roxanne had gotten her head sliced off, and Katie had been forced into a twisted sort of sexual servitude. Yet I had gotten away with just a pair of scuffed palms and a few less strands of hair. I don't know. V said nothing and walked away. When the bedroom door closed shut, I closed my eyes. Freckles were all I saw.